This is a lesson that I'm sure is probably the most familiar of any that we're covering in this part of the Bible this evening, having to do with David and Goliath for a good bit of the lesson through chapter 17, which I'm sure we're well familiar with. The book of 1 Samuel, in the characters that are involved, of course, the first 8 chapters you mainly have about Samuel. Then you have Saul, who's called to be the king in chapter 9, going through about chapter 15 that we looked at on Sunday. He was rejected by God. Why?
He wouldn't obey.
All right, he wouldn't obey. The charge was what? In chapter 15.
To utterly destroy.
Okay. All right, that utterly destroyed. He didn't do that. And what was that called? What did God call that? The sin of rebellion. All right. Rebellion was the main point that is involved. And when one is going to rebel against what God says, then you're going to go downhill in every sense from that. Now, with Saul's rejection, we take up now in chapter 16 with David being anointed. And so you have Saul and David coexisting together. David is going to become the one who has full rule in 2 Samuel, which we're not going to continue on into. But we're going to look at this time where Saul and David are there together, and you have this ascendancy of David clearly being the one who is favored not only by God, but also by the people more and more as you look at it. Last Sunday we looked, and the finishing time was kind of brought quickly, I guess you would say. So we didn't get to really the bridge that would have been there for ending chapter 15 and the starting of chapter 16. If you look at the very end of 15, then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house in Gibeah of Saul. And Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. Nevertheless, Samuel mourned for Saul, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. So even though Saul had been asked for a king, Samuel had pointed out, you've rejected God in this. First he thought himself rejected, but then his point was, you rejected God in doing this. Still, he was wanting the best for Saul. And now, the point there that he grieved for him. Wasn't going to see him again because he had been rejected. Chapter 16, where we are tonight, starts. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil, and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite. For I have provided myself a king among his sons. And Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, he'll kill me. Now, was that a needless kind of a fear that he was having of Saul? Not really. Everything we see about Saul is he's showing his violence more and more. And the sense of that is that he is having a problem here, and there's really one reason why. When you look at the map, where was Samuel's hometown? Ramah. Where's Saul's hometown? Gibeah. Where's David's hometown and Jesse? Bethlehem. Where do you got to go through if you're going from Ramah, Samuel's place, down to Bethlehem? Right through where Saul lives. The road that would have been here would have been along this way from Gibeah into Jerusalem, or skirting Jerusalem on the highway there. But whatever the case, you're going to go through Gibeah down to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is about 7 miles to the south of Jerusalem. Gibeah is less than that to the north. And so what you have is basically a trip of about, as I recall, 15 miles there full, and it would have gone right through where Saul was. Go ahead.
Samuel really couldn't sneak around
Exactly.
People would ask him, where's the seer? Well, he's over there.
Yeah.
Everybody knew where he was.
Well, on the other hand, it seems to be a little bit of tongue-in-cheek for him to say that, though. God said for him to go. Certainly, he had the power to protect him when he went.
Yeah. But it's obvious that his fear is there, nonetheless. And, for whatever reason, whether that's a lack of faith on his part or that which is a dread of Saul and what he knows about him, in that sense, you have this recognition that this is going to put me right in the crosshairs of Saul. All right. So tell me what's happened. Saul has been rejected. We've already looked at that. The fact is that Samuel's told him, what you've done in the rebellion, you're now no longer going to be king. So, pick me up from there. What did Samuel tell, what did God tell Samuel to do? Now, go to Bethlehem, why? Okay. And what's the point of what you were going to be doing? What did he tell him? I have chosen one of Jesse's sons. I provided myself a king, as is pointed out there in those first two verses. Now, when he has the first one come before him, Eliab, what does God say to him? God does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at what? The heart. And so he's trying to get him to understand the difference between what kind of king you had in Saul and what kind of king you're going to have in David. The people liked Saul, why? What kind of king did they want? Guy who looked like a king. Big. All right. Somebody would go before him and fight their battle. Somebody that would be intimidating by his looks. Well, when Eliab comes along, Samuel thinks what? That's the guy. Yeah. Surely this is him. God says, no, not that one. Not the second one. Not the third one. All the way down through the seventh, not him either. So now what?
You got any more kids?
Okay. And just so happens what? Yeah. There's one more. He's out tending the sheep. And so, what does Samuel say? All right, call for him, and he's going to come, and you anoint the one that I show you. They do, and he's anointed. Now, what happened at that point? There's a change that takes place that we notice. And God brings about this change. What do you see happening?
It says the Spirit of the Lord came upon David.
Okay.
And then departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit then went into Saul.
All right. Now, I want to stop and think about that for a minute. Sometimes this is put as if, well, these are just ancient people and they don't know what's happened. One gets depressed, or they'll label it all kinds of things there. I don't know what God used, but I know what the Bible says is true about it. That here you have Saul being given some kind of a spirit, some kind of a point in his mind where he is more angry, where he is one who is more vengeful, and it also is one that has to do with evil, that he's ready to be one who engages fully in that path. When you're rebellious and you continue on in that path, is that going to happen in your life? Sure. That's going to happen. Something was in addition to that, it appears, as here what comes upon Saul is something like fits almost, that he's going to have the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. That doesn't mean that God made him do evil. He was already doing evil. That's why he had been rejected, and it had been pointed out to them, you've been in rebellion. But what happens here is in addition to that, in this sort of a fashion. So now what do we look for? All right. In the theory of young Frankenstein, we need some music to calm this monster, right? And so what do they do? All right, we need to send out for a skillful musician. And who's that skillful musician? Turns out to be David. And so David is brought there, and he plays that music for him so that his kind of savage beast is soothed, so to speak. That it's something that there is a calming effect that is brought upon him in doing that. All right. That's where we leave off with chapter 16. Chapter 17, I want to kind of first introduce with the maps that are here and try to get in our mind this kind of a situation that's going to take place with the battle as David defeats Goliath and then they rout the Philistines. The location is said to be in the valley of Elah. And what's going to take place? You have the valley of Elah right here in this right. This is a blow-up of it, kind of. You have an old creek bed as it is here, dry creek bed, not really. That's a wadi. All over the Near East or the Middle East, you can see these kind of places. There's where a river would flow if there was water. And during the rainy season, there will be. And it looks like a flowing river. But then, in the other time, it's dried up, and it looks like it never has had any water in it at all. And so that's what you have here. This Wadi Saison, I think is the way they say that. It's after a French name from a fellow who did some, what do you call that, digging up? There you go. And it's named after him at this point. The Israelite army is on this side of that wadi, and you have the Philistine army on this side of it. And what takes place is you've got that valley that is right there in between that comes along, and this would be the plain, if you will, that they would be planning to fight on, because that's the only place that has enough room with all of that. So take up from there and tell me, once we've got the place set, now what happens? Who comes out of the Philistine? Goliath. What does he do? Okay, what's the challenge? You pick a guy, and what happens? He comes out here and fights me. And if he can overcome me, then we'll serve you. But if I overcome him, then you'll be our servants. And they got Israelites lining up to go fight him, right? Not exactly. What happens?
Everybody's scared of him.
All right. Wonder why they're scared of him.
Almost 9.5 feet tall.
Okay. Here's the chart. Goliath was of the cubits, 6 cubits. If you just multiply that by 1.5, 9 feet and a span. Span is the hand width. Given a lot of times is about 6 inches. So he's about 9'6". The average soldier in that time would have been somewhere around 5'8". That's the highest figure I can find. As a matter of fact, most of them are a bit less than that. So if you're out there and that's what you're going to give away in height advantage, are you ready to go fight? What if Saul had turned around and said, "Nah, I think I'll go fight him now"? What about that? Would that have been okay? What had they not been doing before they had been going to battle lately that had gotten them in trouble? All right, we need to consult God about this. And so they don't have any chance of being ones who would overcome Goliath or the Philistines as an army until they consult God. Nobody's willing to do it. They don't have faith that God can be victorious together with them except for David. And David comes along and he's ready to go do it. How did David get there to that place? All right, Dad sent food for who? For his brothers and? All right, the captains that are there, so that they would be ones, 10 cheeses he sent for them. So he brings that down to his brothers, and those who are the soldiers, and he looks out and sees this one Goliath who is defying the armies of Israel. Now, let's stop here for a minute, and what was he saying? What kind of things was he saying that got the ire of David up in a hurry? All right. Cursed him by his gods. What before that? What was he saying in his speech? I defy you armies of who? Do what?
First, armies of Israel.
Okay. Now think about that word, Israel. What's the point on the end of that? God. This is the people of God. The strength of God with Israel. The point is, when you even called that name, you were calling the name of God. And David rightly judges that. He says, you've not only defied the people, you've defied God. You've done a challenge that really is saying that he has no power. And that's basically what Goliath is doing. Nobody else is able to have their people saved. You aren't either. You might as well get up here to the lick log and take your woman. And David recognizes, no. Who fights for us is who? God. And therefore, if God can deliver, he can deliver us from you just as certainly as he has from everybody else. What does he then point out? He says, who's the one that, or what has Saul said would happen for this one who overcomes this Goliath, this giant? They tell him. Now, what does Eliab think about that? Okay. Now, little brother, I know what you got a naughty heart in you. And he kind of chides him in that. And you're getting all of this so that you can go and do something foolish here. What is David's response? Is there not a cause? What's that mean?
Oh, there's a reason to do this.
Okay.
Is there not a reason that I'm down here?
Okay.
There is a reason.
How would you say that?
He is asking, was it not a reasonable question?
Yeah. Isn't there a reason I ought to be upset about this? You know, why didn't this upset you? It was kind of like turning around on him and saying, here is this giant who in essence is defying the army of God. And you aren't upset about that? What's the matter with you? And that's the effect of what he is saying. He's trying to get them to be as stirred in their spirit about this as he is. Because he's thinking of it in terms of the cause of God. Not thinking about it in terms of himself and what he gets. He's thinking about it in terms of the cause of God and what should be done here. And that's the thing that really has him perturbed. Did I see a hand up somewhere? Okay. Now, what does he tell Saul? When I was out out being a shepherd, what had happened? All right, lion and bear would come along, and they'd try to take the sheep. So what did I do? All right. Got the lion by the beard, took a hold of the bear, I slew him, and I saved the lamb. Now, was that all his power that did that? What did he recognize? God is the one who helped me with that. The Lord was with me then, and the Lord will be with me now, is the point that he's making. That's what the people have forgotten about. And so he's told the point. Now, Saul has heard this, and what does he say to him? Okay, go. Before you go, what am I going to give you? All right, I'll give you all my armor, and we'll put it on you. And what does he say? I mean, you look at this and you recognize what Saul was like, this big strapping fella, and you recognize David's a boy at this time, not much more than a youth would have been. And so it obviously doesn't fit, and he said, I haven't proved this. Haven't gone out and used this in such a way that I'm comfortable with it. And so he takes off that armor. What's he going to use instead? All right. I'm going to go out here and have this pouch. I'm going to get me a few rocks here. And I'm going to use those rocks to arm in my sling. And I'll defeat this giant with that. All right. When you have that point, he comes out against Goliath. He says to him, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of who? The Lord of hosts. There's his point. That's who he's calling upon. Why? Because the battle does not come by man. The battle is the Lord's. The battle is Jehovah's. What does that mean? What does that mean? The battle is the Lord's. The battle is Jehovah's.
The outcome is dependent on whether the Lord's with him or not with him.
It's not about David, it's just the instrument.
That's the point. That you have this sense that what you need to recognize, Goliath, is you may look at me like a dog, and that's what he called him. You may see in me no power, but the power's in God behind this whole thing. What God will do is save. On Sunday, you talked about Jonathan going over and taking on a whole host of those of the Philistines. He said something kind of like that too. What was it? You remember? Okay. The Lord's able to save by few or many. It doesn't matter. The power is in God, is the point. Think about that, because you're going to be seeing Jonathan, who has already shown that kind of faith. Now Jonathan's going to see that kind of faith in David. So in the next chapter, chapter 18, we're going to look at them, and there's a friendship, there's a bond that develops there, and I'm convinced the reason for it is that. So out goes David to meet Goliath. Goliath comes charging at him. He takes the stone, puts it in his sling, and what happens? Right in the head and sank in. And what happens? He drops him. When you look at this passage, I can't help but kind of point something out here. Excuse me for being a word nut, but these are used. In verse 35, it says, I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of the mouth. And when he arose, speaking of the bear and the lion, I caught him by his beard and smote him. That word, smote him, is a word, naga, that has to do with, I hit him, I struck him, I took a whack with the sword that was there. and I slew him. That word always has to do with a death, and a particularly gruesome death by bloody kind of a sense. He let the blood flow, is the way we might say that, so that he died. It's a very graphic description that David is given. And now what does he do when he turns to this guy? So I'm going to do that to you. I'm going to smite you and I'm going to slay you. In other words, I'm going to strike you. I'm going to bring about a stabbing or a slashing of you, and I'm going to bring about your death, and your blood's going to flow. All of that from who? A little kid, as he's looking at. What does he have to be doing? I mean, Goliath at this point. Oh boy, this guy's full of himself. Little punk thinks he's going to do all this. Is the idea. Was David's confidence an overconfidence or a pride? No, not at all. It was confidence in God. And that's where he was putting that confidence, is how God was going to bring this all about. So what does he do? Kills him, goes, gets his sword, the sword of Goliath, because he didn't have one. He chops off his head, and what does he do with his head?
We back up just a step.
Sure.
I believe that the stone knocked him out, and the sword killed him.
Well, that could have been.
I think that's the way it reads. I'd always thought, well, how is he going to hit him in the forehead and kill him? But it says that he went forward and used Goliath's sword and killed him.
Well, the statement is it sunk into his brain, is the literal statement that is there. Now, I don't know that I can prove from the text which one killed him. I was looking at that as well from the language. I'm not sure I can. Jason, oh, wait a second. You have
Doesn't verse 50 say that? So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him, but there was no sword in the hand of David. When he killed him, there was no sword in his hand. That's the way I read that.
But in 51, it says that he drew out Goliath's sword and killed him.
That's what it says
So,
in King James.
either way, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says both of them about he slew him.
Yeah.
There.
Eventually
But
he killed
the
him.
word, again, that's one of the reasons I use the word of what it was. The word slew comes from a word that the blood flowed. He could have killed him with a stone, but the blood didn't flow from that stone. The blood flowed from the cutting off of his head. And so I think that's why you have both of those statements in there, and I'm not sure which one would say what was the actual cause of death. No death certificate known, so we don't know for sure. Jason, did you have something?
No, just to say.
Just that? Okay. All right. Okay, anybody else there? Go ahead.
The Lord was with him when he picked up that sword, because I don't think he would have been able to pick up that large,
Well,
that big sword. The Lord had to be with him all the way through.
he was with him all the way, there's no doubt about that.
I just had a question, because when David was playing the instrument for Saul, he knows him, but then in the next chapter, he asks who he is.
I was waiting to see who was going to bring that up. Good point. How do we explain that?
I thought he was asking who his father was, not him.
All right, that's one of the points, but what had he been told back there in chapter 16? He's son of Jesse, you send for him, been told about him there, so there was something known about that. Are there some circumstances you might know someone, and then you see them in another sense, and you don't know them because of the way things are at that point? That may be part of it. Second thing is you have Saul having this spirit of evil that was within him. I don't know how that affected his thinking either. But one of those, we're not told how to reconcile that. But I can see either one of those may be causing the problem. Go ahead.
Well, and just as David was playing for him, doesn't mean there was a
Yeah, but he was the armor bearer too.
So,
He trusted him to be an armor bearer, so,
but he had all kinds of servants around
Yeah.
him that
Well,
the king's not gonna necessarily know them all on a first name basis
Yeah.
that way.
on 21, it says, "So David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly and became his armor bearer." Who loved who greatly?
Saul loved David.
And then later he's asking, who is this guy?
Yeah. That's why I say, to me, there's something that he's known, whether it be that he's in a different circumstance now of coming to slay this giant. And now there's a different appearance than what he's had before. Or whether it's talking about the sense in which Saul's mind being affected by what he's going through in this evil spirit. I'm not sure. I don't know how to say exactly that because I don't see the statement in Scripture. But either one of those seem to me to be able to do it. Go ahead.
Yeah, we sometimes say, well, this can't be the same God.
Yeah.
And I imagine having a guy that was your armor bearer and playing a harp, and then all of a sudden he's killing this giant.
Yeah.
It's just, trying to connect the dots there.
There are all kinds of things that I could bring up and say maybe, but the end analysis, I don't know. In that exactly which one describes it. I can see how it could be in a few different senses. Doesn't give me a problem in that way, but I just don't know the one to say this is what particularly explains that in this case.
We don't know the time frame either, how many years from one to the other.
Yeah, evidently not a lot at that point from what we've got as far as the timing factor that goes in later and seeing when he fought Goliath and that sort of way. Anybody else got anything there? Good question. I was waiting on who would ask that one. So you get the blue ribbon there on that one. Okay. Anything else there? All right. So we have this head chopped off of Goliath. What does he do with it? Takes it to Jerusalem. I wonder why. Was Jerusalem in the hands of the Israelites at this point? No. Who was it in the hands of? Jebusites. Think the Jebusites knew about the Philistines? Yep, they had problems with them too. And what did hanging that head up in Jerusalem say? Okay, there you have it. It's a not so subtle point to make. Now, you have this capital, Jerusalem, is going to become the place for them to have the capital and ultimately the temple be built there under the next king beyond David, Solomon. The city of David comes to be now where the thought is, and I think probably a pretty good thought, that you have this being taken to Jerusalem, where it would be on the wall of Jerusalem. The city of David, as it was called at Jerusalem, was right on that wall. It became an appendage out to the south and west of Jerusalem. And that seems to be the wall there just on the top of that appendage that comes to be the city of David is where this head is hung. And that's the tradition that the Jews have had for many times, kind of an oral tradition that was passed down, and probably so. It showed the power of David. It gives you a little bit of a sense of why that then came to be called the city of David. All right, anything else there? Okay. Here, after this battle that took place, then they went down the Elah Valley up to Gath, and they were more of them that were killed at the gates of Ekron, it says. So what would they have been doing? Let me go back over here. Here they were at this place. Now, they meet here. And which way Philistines start going up this valley. The valley of Elah. That's the one that you see over here. Okay. The valley of Elah down and then back up to the north. That's where you would have had this battle raging on all the way to Ekron. Why Ekron? What was that to the Philistines we've read about a little bit earlier? That was one of their main cities. So they're fleeing for help in all of this. What you have in this battle, sometimes we just think about it as David and Goliath. What you have is the first great battle against the Philistines to totally put them out of power. By the time David finishes with his kingship, they are not a problem anymore. They're all subjugated. They've been utterly wiped out and defeated. This is the start of that. Now, think about it. How big a start's that going to be? When you take their giant, Goliath, you have a young boy, kills him, takes his head off, and you have an army slain by this. That's the start of something that's a whole sea change in this kind of a sense, and it's the one that starts a domino effect with the enemies of Israel from that point on throughout the kingship of David. This is a very important point that I think is not stressed sometimes. We think about this one battle with David and Goliath. It was far more than that. This was the seed from which a whole development came of power with Israel by one who's a king who trusts in God and goes out there and brings peace to Israel within his 40-year time. That's pretty good when you look at it as to exactly what's taking place. All right, anybody else got anything there? Well, chapter 18, 1 through 16. You have this statement at the end, as soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, and Saul still holding the David still holding the Philistine's head. Whose son are you, young man? Saul asked him. David said, I'm the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. Now, when that's told in chapter 18, what's the first thing we see? He's before Saul, telling him about what happened and how it was that that had taken place. Chapter 18, verse 1, it came to pass when he made an end of speaking unto Saul that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Not only did Saul love David at the first, you have Jonathan having a love for David. Why? Because he showed the same courage, same dependence on God, same faith that was there. This is a close development that's there. Gives him his sword and his change of clothes. They're coming back into the city, and what happens? The women sing, and what do they sing? Saul has slain his thousands, and David... Oh boy, that's got to make him happy, doesn't it? What does Saul think about that? Very angry, very wroth. Is the statement that's used in the older versions. And the point is that there's a recognition that David, is now a challenger. So he gets in one of his fit moods, and what does he do? Throws a spear at him. Trying to scare him? Trying to kill him. What's going to happen from this point on, real quick? We're going to have Saul pursuing David. Who's going to be on David's side? Do what? Jonathan's going to be there. Who else? God is. Who else? All right. He marries a daughter of Saul, right? Now, what happens? She's also going to, during this time, aid David rather than her own father. And so you've got a system here that's developing that's going to be kind of a big drama taking place within the family and also within the kingdom. All right, we'll stop there and begin with chapter 18, verse 17, Sunday morning, Lord willing.